I'm happy to see so many back. I was afraid I had scared you away in the previous presentation, but that's good that it was not the case. The program for the next 55 minutes or so is a very short introduction by the panelists here to who they are and what they do, and then we will open the floor for hopefully a great discussion and conversation with you guys. So that's the plan. But let me first introduce the panel. We have over here, we have Dr. Shrikumar, who is the chairman and co-founder and managing director of a company called C6 Energy, which he founded in 2010. It's a very exciting company. I believe it's in offshore biomass production and conversion to a variety of bioproducts, biofuels and biochemicals. Sri will give a little deeper introduction to the company and what it does in a few minutes. He has a very impressive track record. In 2012, he was named Entrepreneur of the Year by Biospectrum magazine, and in April this year, he was elected president to the Association of Biotech-led Enterprises in India. So great history here. And to my left here, I have Sandra Sassow, who is the CEO and co-founder of SEaB Energy. It's there's no mistakes up here. It's two different companies and very different. So Sandra's company use bacteria to solve waste problems and turn waste into fertilizer, electricity, and water. She also has a very impressive track record and is actually seen as a role model for women in business innovation. And she's also really great at making the world aware of the powers of white biotech, because you've been successful getting your company on air with using CNBC and BBC and other large media. So that's really well done. The world needs to know about this fantastic technology.
Thank you.
So why don't you, Sandra, tell us a little bit more about the company and what you're doing?
Okay. So can everybody hear me? I don't know if it's on. So SEaB Energy is a startup or a scale-up, if you want to call it that. We're commercialized in 8 countries now, working through the entrepreneurial path. So for those of you that have been here for the last 3 days, going through all of the various stages, everything from being cash poor to being out of cash to noting how to get around those issues and move on. So we've taken the concept of how to manage waste. If you look around the world, everybody has a bag of waste. You put it in some kind of place, and someone very nicely comes along and takes it away. And that's, for the majority of you here, the end of your thought process around what happens to that waste. We looked a little bit further at what was happening with waste, and it actually goes to generally around the corner and gets dumped in most places around the world. If you're lucky, it goes to a regulated landfill. And if you're even more rare, it goes and gets reprocessed into something useful. But in doing that, if you look at how it's happening, it's being put into a truck and it's being moved a large amount of miles. So generally here, everybody's waste today, whatever you did, if you put it outside, it would have gone in a vehicle and gone 70 miles. 70 miles, add everybody here. So take the UK, I'll give you the US numbers because they're more impressive. 300 million miles every day. So 300 million miles, your bag of waste as an individual is traveling on a daily basis. So add everybody around the planet, so that's one country. 300 million miles in a vehicle getting 3 miles to the gallon. So then add the footprint of your waste as you start to move it, and you start to realize why we decided that perhaps decentralizing waste conversion into something else was probably the best approach to the problem. So we took a centralized industry and we tried to develop a decentralized product that would act as an appliance. So I come from high tech, and I'll say, as an entrepreneur, what the hell was I thinking? Doing a hardware product. I should have stayed in software. That is so much easier. But we're in hardware as well as software, so now we have to have two things. We have to have software and software licenses, and we have to have hardware that we have to build and certify and ship and keep track of and find spare parts for and keep the maintenance program for and keep track of. So try and imagine all of that as you're building your business. But those elements, we decided if you could make them small enough and you could decentralize it and you could put it into the fabric of the urban environment or the fabric of each individual town or go down to the village level, you could suddenly create an appliance that would change the way the world was handling waste. You no longer, and when we talk about waste, for us it's organic, so we can only take food waste, food scraps, and sewage and animal manures. So in the urban environment, animal manure generally means dog poo, but in the village environment, it can mean a lot of different things. So try and imagine that your new city or your old city no longer has waste trucks coming to collect your waste, that the building you live in is a closed loop environment, that building is able to create from its waste its own water, that it has a portion of its power generated from the waste, and that if you're growing things in the urban environment, that you're producing the fertilizer you need for that growing at that location. So suddenly you've changed the nature of the urban environment. So that's who we are, that's what we're trying to do, and we'd love to have you all join us on our journey.
That's great. Sandra, just one quick question before we move on to Sri. You said you are commercial in 8 countries. What are those countries?
UK, France, Portugal, shortly India on the ground. So we're not on the ground yet in some of these, but we've got orders. So India, Japan, South Korea, Brazil, United States. I think that's 8.
Great. And Sri? Offshore biomass. Yeah. Tell us about that.
All right. So, C6 was a completely accidental company, and I never intended being an entrepreneur in the first place. I just had a good IPO from the previous company, and I was like, so I was visiting professor at my alma mater, that's the Indian Institute of Science, and I was just sitting down with a group of students just like you, over afternoon cups of coffee. They'd just won the iGEM competition. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. But, and then we were saying, okay, you are these biotechnology students. What is it that we can do over the next 1 year? You don't have to make a company, but let's just think of some great ideas that can solve big problems for India, which are not in the healthcare domain. Because I'd spent 25 years of my life in the healthcare, so I said, let's look at something else. So, usually when you start thinking like that, it's usually in the area of food, energy, water. That's typically what it comes about. And then when you start framing the problem for India, and we said, India is a country of 1.3 billion people, and it's really going to grow to 1.6 billion people. We just about managed to feed ourselves. We're self-sufficient in food, just about managed to feed ourselves. Our land, we're really limited in land. Because we have a lot of people, but we are already the 3rd largest consumer of energy in the world and rising very rapidly. For instance, we imported 150 million tons of crude oil in 2015, and in 2020 we're going to be importing 250 million tons of crude oil, and that's not disappearing anywhere. And if you want to do it all sustainably, you need a lot of biomass, and you have this country where you're just about managing to make enough biomass to feed your people. How in the world are we ever going to where do we have more land to make more biomass to do all the sustainable stuff? All the technology is great, but if you don't have the raw material, there's nothing you can do. And that's the whole genesis of the idea of C6 Energy, where we said, okay, let's just sidestep the problem, save the land, to grow the agriculture, do the agriculture for the people. Let's go and cultivate the sea, do farming on the oceans of plants that are adapted for the sea. And let's use that biomass to make crude oil or to make renewable biofuels. And that's really how this journey got started. There are many plants that grow in the sea. The technology didn't exist to do farming on the sea, so we just went ahead, and over the last 9 years, what we've done is invented that technology. We've really created large-scale engineering structures that you can very cheaply put out to hundreds of square kilometers on the sea. We've developed combined harvesters sea combined harvesters that travel on these structures. And that's one part. And the other part is the biomass that comes from the sea is very different in its chemical composition. It's all 6-carbon sugars, and that's the genesis of the company. That's why it's called C6 Energy. It's a play on the word sea. And but it's different. For example, it's very salty, the biomass, and most of the land biotechnology, the microbes, the enzymes just won't work in such salty conditions. So we had to develop a lot of new biotechnology, isolate marine microbes, do a lot of conversion exercises. So we have two basic areas. One is the engineering to grow the biomass, and then there's the biotechnology to do all the bioconversion. So we have actually done this. We have made crude oil from biomass, and that's actually, we've proved the concept. But just the scale of these things is so large that we said, what should we do first with our biomass? And what we've done is, on a small scale, based on the understanding that we have made extracts from these sea plants. And we found that if you apply these extracts to land agriculture, and we've tried it on a variety of crops, more than 20 different crops all over India, we've increased the agricultural yield by more than 15 to 30%, depending upon the kind of crop. So biggest crop is rice. We get at least a 15% yield increase on rice, and so that product is already commercial. We think there are many more products, and we think we can build a whole sustainable bioeconomy based on this very, very large and scalable supply of biomass, and that's basically what C6 Energy is about. So
that's really great, great technology, great result. So Sandra, you said you're now in 8 countries. So how can this be scaled up to 80 countries? What needs to happen? What could accelerate these processes? What are the barriers that is in the way?
Barriers in the way. Barriers are funding to scale the business, supply chain availability to localize production, because we believe in localizing the manufacture of the actual units themselves, and legislation. So the speed of our entry into the different markets is really slow, because we have to adapt to local regulatory environments, and we have to or in a lot of cases, the local regulatory environment has to adapt to us. So we have to, we're a gas producing device being installed inside a building. There are no regulations in most environments that allow that. You're allowed to use gas in a building, but not necessarily make gas in a building. And so getting the regulatory environment to accelerate the acceptance of new tech around the world is one of the things that we're working on. So we work with, I'm part of the World Alliance for Efficient Solutions, which is a group run out of Switzerland. So from the gentleman who did the solar flight, so the round the world, I don't know if everybody here saw it, but the round the world solar flight. And the idea behind that is to accelerate access to the market of solutions that are creating efficiencies. And in order to do that, a lot of it is regulatory. A lot of it is the regulations around the variety. So I'm sure you have regulations around the use of the biomass within and acceptance of it. And we're seeing both the byproduct regulation environment needs to adapt, and then just the installation environment needs to adapt.
Yeah, yes. But when I hear your story about the company and the technology, I mean, the benefits to me are so obvious. So do you sense that those benefits, when they are so obvious, that gives you some kind of potential benefits in the dialogue with regulators, or do you envision that this could be the case going forward? Or
so we're entering a business sector that has some very large players. So this will be the same for a lot of you that want to get into with your entrepreneurial ideas. And as such, they sit and lobby regulatory environments and regulatory bodies quite regularly. And as a result, it is difficult for us to get the legislation changed. So I'll give an example of our product going into the French market. It's taken us an enormous amount of time to get through and into the market. The need for the product and the market acceptance for the product is there. What's blocking the market is that the permitting process for our system, which is tiny, is the same price as a permit for a 20, 30, 40 million pound unit. So, you know, where we're at 500,000 pounds, they're at 10 million pounds, the permit cost is the same. So in our case, the permit cost is 100 or 200,000 pounds. Suddenly, you block the market for a new entrant. So it's quite an interesting issue to run into. And there's an enormous amount of money that exists with the current methodology of doing things. And so you're disrupting a sector where there are some players making an enormous amount of money.
Yeah.
And so there's resistance to change. Yeah. And that flows all the way up into the regulatory environment.
Yeah. And to you, Shri, so how many facilities do you run currently? And same question to you. So what would it take to multiply this by a factor 10 in the next couple of years?
So right now we have a facility in India. It's on the east coast of India, off the coast of Tuticorin. That's a port. So we have a lot of farming. And then the other facility we have is off the coast of Bali in Indonesia. And we do farming there as well. And the reason we do that is because we are already in the market with a product, the biostimulant, okay, the extract. And for us, it's now about supply chain stability. You know, even though we are doing farming on the sea, we're not immune to a typhoon or a tsunami or a storm. And as we grow and scale, it's very important to assure the customers that we have a stable supply chain and we are seasoned. It's like any other agriculture that, you know, is that nothing will disrupt our supply chain. Besides, I mean, these are nice tropical regions, and there's a diversity of seaweed and sea plant species available, so it also works for us in that way. Okay. I think scaling, the scale is basically dependent upon the market, and what we have found is because of access to capital is you know, you just go in and say if you wanted to lay out 1,000 square kilometers of farm on the sea, it will cost you a couple of $1 billion in investment. And it's a very interesting situation when you come to think of it as a new raw material, because if you wanted to convert, if you wanted to simultaneously set up, say, a biofuel plant, say a crude oil production plant, because we can make crude oil because we can plug that crude oil into the mouth of a refinery, and every product downstream is all renewable. So you're not fighting the refinery boys, you're just going with the flow. That's the reason we've decided that we should make crude oil from sea plants. But you know, even if you had to make this crude oil plant, it's a catch-22 situation. Do you invest in the plant and then hope that your sea plant farms will take off? Because you can't do 1,000 square kilometers in 3 months. You need several years to set it up. Or if you set up the farms, then you're saying, you know, what do you do with all the biomass in the meantime? Because there's nothing else that you can do with it. Okay, and the farmers who are growing it for you are saying, hey, you promised to buy this, now what do you do with it? We can say, you know, hold on, just dump it into the sea, and you know, while we build our main plant. So this is a catch-22 situation. So the way we have overcome that is to look at markets that can be done profitably with lower amounts of sea plants. So this agricultural biostimulant market is a very interesting example of that. So with just a few square kilometers of farm, we can make enough product which can actually start allowing us to ramp up our production. You know, so as the market for the agricultural biostimulant increases, now we've got in India, now we're expanding to Southeast Asia, and then we're already looking at Europe and the US as markets. And as the markets grow, and it's an extremely good product, it's really completely natural and organic or all those nice labels. It really works. And we've got the science behind it. But as these markets grow, it allows us to scale our farms linearly until we reach a scale where other things become feasible. You know, between you and me, I think biofuel is going to be the last one because it's the least profitable. But before that will come animal feed, renewable bioplastics, and so many other things that you can do as the size increases and the costs of the biomass drop. So that's our game plan.
Great. So two really great technologies that you guys represent, and great potential to scale and great challenges. So that's exciting. So let's open for questions from the floor. Do we have anybody with microphones? I see plenty of hands. That's great.
Hi, my name is David. I'm from GSK. I'd like to go back to what you mentioned of 50 companies in the Fortune Chain World Index. I'd like to remark that that list is not the most updated one. That one is from 2016. The only reason I know that is because it's the only year that GSK actually made it to the top one. So I'd like to know, I know that Novozymes is not anymore in the top 10, so I'd like to know what might be the top 10 in 2016 and what's happened in these last 2 years, so it's not anymore. Thank you.
Yes. we don't know. It's the rating process is not transparent, but we still like to be recognized and be visible. I can't explain what happened. It's very intransparent, these processes. So but congratulations with your position. Okay. And I guess you also don't know what happened.
I'm Amadeus from Indonesia. Thank you for doing that for us. And I really like your presentation. That was genius. For all panelists, since it's all a multinational company, and how do you find the regulation or policy from each country that you're trying to penetrate, catching up with the technology that you offer? Because it's relatively new technology. Is it far behind or is it catching up? Maybe challenges and advantages. Thank you very much.
You want to go ahead?
Sure. So I wouldn't say that the regulation catches up. We work through the regulatory environment. So it takes us anywhere from 6 to 12 months to get the first set of approvals. And then after that, we have less of an issue in the market. So it's an education. What's happened from our perspective as a company is that we have a package now. So we're ready when we go to a regulatory environment, and the majority, let's say 90% of what's in the package is what the next environment will want, and then we just have a few bits to adapt. And we're not finding, we are finding that in each, so we have a physical product, so in each geography, we are finding that there are certain components that we have to adapt to work in that. So, there are the differences in, for example, CE and UL or CUL or the regulatory environment in Japan or in Australia, or the emissions regulations or the variety, whether you're allowed to mix the wastes in our case or not. And we're finding that we've made or designed the product in such a way that it's adaptable, and without too much effort, we're able to meet the local regulatory environment. But it's more a process of us being more prepared now, rather than the regulations necessarily being easier or learning.
In our case, there are two aspects. One is because we're actually dealing with a very new frontier, which is basically farming the oceans. So I'll talk about that first, and that differs from country to country, the laws of the sea. I think in countries like Indonesia, it's far more developed, and the ability to go and lease a certain area of the sea is devolved down to the village level and the foreshore. In a country like India, it's more centralized. So that's something. But what's more important is what we've always found works well is ultimately, irrespective of the technology, we're dealing with the coastal communities, and we're dealing with something that will make their lives better. You know, fishing is one of the last hunter-gatherer professions in this world. You know, you go out, and especially when the seas are overfished, you go out and you should really look at these coastal communities. They burn several, well, at least $1,000 worth of diesel, and they come back sometimes empty-handed. And you know, it's tough work. And so we find that when we give them an alternative profession, see, you know, even though we have all this automation to do this, we have various levels at which we can employ this automation, where people can actually have an alternative livelihood. They can cultivate the seed, they grow something useful there, and then we can buy it back from them. So it gives them a good opportunity to earn income. Especially, it empowers women in these coastal communities enormously. We find that as long as you focus on that, most of the authorities, they really want to work with you, and you know, it feels good. So we do that quite a lot, both in Indonesia as well as in India. So that's one side. And the other side is, interestingly, when you're making a very, very cutting edge product, say this biostimulant that is used to increase agricultural productivity, the way it works, it's neither a fertilizer nor is it a pesticide. It kind of works in between. It actually, the mechanism of action is that there are molecules that stimulate and upregulate many of the genetic pathways in the plants. They increase photosynthesis, they increase cell division, and they increase nutrient uptake. So as a result, there is far more, the plants can utilize fertilizer more efficiently. For example, there's 20% greater increase of nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. They are more drought resistant. When you're dealing with these new technologies, many times there is no regulation that covers this. And this is in fact a very interesting thing, where we actually work with the regulators. We actually try and make sure that they understand what's happening. And this is a work in progress, but that's happening. But it doesn't prevent us from selling, because, you know, so the interesting thing is that regulations are okay, take India for instance. The regulation says if you meet the following criteria, you have to, you become a fertilizer, and therefore we will regulate you. And the insecticides and the pesticides law says if you meet the following criteria, then you are termed as an insecticide and we will regulate you. But if you meet neither of these criteria, they say, you know what, don't come to us, just do what you want. But that also leads to a free-for-all market where, you know, get all kinds of spurious products. So we are very interested in actually bringing out regulation. So it's a long answer to a short question. So that's good.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I have two questions, one for Sandra and one for Klaus. So for Sandra, I was wondering, who is in the end the entity who buys the set of technologies to implement in the country? Is it the governments themselves, or the local governments in the city? And is there a solution made for instance, people who can pay more for their waste management that can subsidy for those neighborhoods that can't actually pay for any other form of waste management, or where there's already an issue with just picking up normal garbage any day that is accumulating? For instance, in Latin America, many marginalized neighborhoods are teeming with trash. So a lot of times we want to talk about the recycling issue, but we haven't been able to pick up the garbage. So I'm wondering, kind of in that space, those two questions. For Klaus, you mentioned in your presentation that you have some scouts that go out to look at these natural processes and bring back these ideas. Is that a job position? Is that like an explorer scientist kind of thing? I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So we do all sorts of different models around the unit, is probably the best way to term it. So we sell the product as a product, we sell it as a service, so waste as a service, which is more how people are accustomed to dealing with it now. And we work with both government and corporate. Right now we're not doing residential other than at developer level or at community level. And the idea behind it is for people to start to take responsibility. So by decentralizing the waste, if you put it in a building, it tends to be the building management that takes on the responsibility of processing or using the waste. And you can do that at neighborhood, but you can equally do it in an environment at village level, whether it's in India. I know we're working with the government in Colombia to look at a couple of locations in Colombia. So, and that is, we're trying to create it a little bit along the lines of wind, as wind was done in Germany, where they were communities investing into a particular unit, and will do a pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-throw model for the lesser, I guess, the communities that have less money to invest in a unit up front. And I'm working with project finance corporates, so both at country level, so where they're more venture-based funds that are looking at regular project finance, so USA, Canada, Europe, and then other funds through the IFC that are looking at infrastructure plays and working and creating an infrastructure environment in communities where there isn't infrastructure now.
Yes. Yes, and our scouts, yes, they get paid. It is a job. It's not like that they are out there in the forest or in the Arctic areas all the time, but some of our scientists typically are experts in fungi or in microbes. Some of them have a PhD in fungi, and then part of their job is to go out there and discover new fungi or new microbes, bring them home to the labs, try to understand what is creating the breakdown of some organic material, or what is creating these reactions, and then some of this can immediately be tested in different industries if it has a value-adding use. If not, then it's stored in our biobank. We have one of the largest biobanks in the world, where we have hundreds of thousands of samples from all over the world. And then when we have a customer or a partner that has an opportunity to improve a process or a product, then we deep dive in the bank and try to find some solutions that can meet those needs.
Hi, I'm Dominic, PhD student. I'm sure everyone knows me now from the volume of questions I've been asking. But there's been a lot of talk about data revolution and how it's changing personalized medicine. Do you see a lot of work in sort of digital sustainability? Like, does that exist, or because it seems as if a lot of the products you've been describing are very much rooted in physical things you have found, or a farming system. Do you think there's a space for these new digital technologies that are revolutionizing healthcare to help with sustainability?
Any
Can I?
good answers?
So I went and I pitched to Google X, and I pitched on the basis that we were big data and that I came with a box, and that ignore the piece of physical equipment that needs to come with me, but that we actually have data. So the data element is very much embedded in what we're looking at. So sustainability needs to be, and sustainability, so for our system, we're looking at not just the sustainability data that we're going to accumulate, but also the health data. So when we start to decentralize, and those of you who have a queasy stomach don't listen, but basically if you go into at the building level and you take sewage at the building level, some of the work that's being done is that you can evaluate health within that local footprint. And if you extrapolate that, one of the things that they're looking at is looking at the opioid issue in the United States and being able to monitor at a localized level what's going on, and then being able to apply that to programs that are being put in place so that you can tell whether they're working or not. So data is absolutely part of what we're doing, and we capture a lot of data along with what we do.
So we're still we're still wrapping our hands around this problem, but there's potentially a very big application for digital, for lack of a better one, digital ocean agriculture. Okay, I'll explain the problem to you because we are just finding these things out. When you talk about land agriculture and you want to say predict what's the best time to sow or to harvest or what's the weather going to be, there's a fundamental assumption that the land is static and it's the stuff around the climate and the rainfall that's actually going to affect what's happening in the land. But the situation in the sea is both. The water is moving all the time, and so is the climate changing. And so what we are finding is that a patch of sea that's particularly productive in one season, for the next month it's less productive, and nothing changed very much. But we're pretty sure that what did change is the direction of the currents changed, the flow of the nutrients changed, and we're trying to model all of this. Okay, so this is so new a field because agriculture on the sea is actually very new. So we're still getting the hang of all of this, and we have our scientists here who actually are climate experts, who actually model all this stuff, and I think they're getting somewhere. So this is the answer to you.
Yeah, and in Novozymes, we know that the digitalization is going to change and even disrupt the business for many of our customers and partners, and because of that, we have established actually this year a new function to look into these areas so that we get an early idea about how is this going to impact the role of enzymes and microbes. How can we play along these things? How can we maybe even enable even more value by understanding better what's going to happen with our customers in the future, and also maybe with our supply chains. So we know it's going to change a lot. We don't know how. We are investing in getting our hands around it right now.
We always hear these when we talk about biotechnology, traditionally bioenergy and biofuels, but they have quite a controversial traditional sustainability record and the trade-offs in terms of land use changes. And so some we should sort of leave that behind and focus on biomaterials and stuff that we can't produce by renewables because we need a carbon source. But it sounds like the innovations that your company is coming up with are saying actually we should move back to bioenergy. We can do that sustainably. So I'm wondering which side of the fence you fall on. I presume you probably know what side you fall on, and if you think that the bioenergy approach solves the issues, or whether you have any evidence that it does, and whether you assess that.
I presume the question's to me, right?
Yeah, but I'd be interested.
Okay, let me have a shot at this. The fundamental issue with biofuels has always been the food versus fuel issue, and the fact is that agriculture consumes 90% of the freshwater use in the world today. Okay, so even if you had the land, you would need enormous amounts of fresh water, and somebody showed a water scarcity map, and India is right there. Okay, so by doing what we did, by moving the debate away from actually land use and water use just to the sea, you solved all these problems in one shot, because you don't have to worry about the land usage because you're going to the sea, and the land is actually there for agriculture and to feed the people. There's really no need for any water because you have all the water you need in the sea. And one of the most important things in agriculture that we forget is today nitrogen, that is essential for agriculture, is one of the most energy consuming ingredients to produce. The Haber process, which produces urea, consumes a huge amount of energy. But when you go to plants that are well adapted to the ocean, and I think this is only going to get better as our understanding of biology increases and people learn how to safely engineer these plants in a way that they can become even better at what they're doing. We use natural plants, of course, but they're so well adapted already that you don't even have to worry about the fertilizer issue. In fact, some of the seed plants that we're growing are so amazing that when, the sea is mostly sodium chloride, okay? But there is small amounts of potassium and other valuable elements in there. It is engineered to suck up potassium from a sea of sodium. And so the juice from the sea plants is actually very, very rich in potassium. So not only can we produce, when we grow these sea plants and we process them, we get a juice, and that's something that contains fertilizer that you can bring back to the land plants. You know, this is just beginning to be explored. I think by articulating the problem and by moving it away, especially in a context that I come from in our country, because, you know, if we were doing this in the United States, for example, if the fundamental shortage of land is not there, you know, if you compare the population of the United States with, or the ratio of land per person in the United States with, say, somebody, if it's India, the United States has 12 times more land per person than India has, okay? So, sometimes it's very important that these solutions can only get articulated in a certain geographical context where there's importance. So that's what happened to us. It was accidental, but we just happened to us. But once the solution has been found that you can actually do farming on the sea, 75% of the world is water, okay? Something very interesting happened. As our engineers started developing these large structures to grow seaweeds and sea plants on, you know, one day they suddenly sat around and said, why are we just growing sea plants on these structures? Why don't we just put solar cells on these structures? So suddenly you have in the middle of the ocean floating solar cells. And guess what? You can, once you generate power in the water, in the sea, you can desalinate the water. So that's become suddenly a very, very hot spin-off from some of the technology that we're doing. We think that we can provide desalinated water to many of the coastal cities along India and many, many islands, and this is going to be increasingly important in future. So, yeah, I mean, I think innovation knows no bounds. Sometimes we shouldn't get stuck in this paradigm, and something's happened which completely changed what can be done.
I think any or most technologies has a sustainable version and an unsustainable version, and biofuels is certainly one of them. We have a big business in biofuels where enzymes enable the breakdown of ag material into sugars, and we've been very aware of the risk that this should follow an unsustainable pathway and contribute to things we didn't want, but we also believe that there was definitely an opportunity in this technology to help generate more of what we want, including creating jobs, food development, and low carbon energy. So what we did already back in 2012 to really understand the issue was to form a partnership with the UN and the World Bank under the large umbrella initiative called Sustainable Energy for All, which was driven by UN and World Bank. And we took initiative to form a coalition of partners to first learn and define what is sustainable bioenergy. How can this be developed in a way that contributes positively to societal development, environmental solutions, and solutions for people without compromising the needs of people and the environment. And today, this is a large-scale initiative with more than 50 partners, inclusive of the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, who before 2012 had declared biofuels a crime to humanity. They are now a partner in this initiative and help drive sustainable bioenergy in the right direction. So my key point here is that I think all technologies should be handled with care. You need to understand the positive and the negatives of these technologies and then drive them towards the positive direction and outcome. And here, collaboration, partnerships is key, because as an individual industry, you cannot understand all the pros and the cons of these technologies. So that's why we need to work together with universities, policymakers, regulators, all kind of different stakeholders in societies to really understand all the pros and cons.
Hi, I'm Fiona from Ireland. I was just wondering, in relation to the sea, what do you think biotechnology or technology in general can do to try and prevent pollution in the sea and try to cure the pollution that's already there?
That's interesting. One of the big things about at least the coastal waters, is there's a lot of runoff from land. But there's a lot of runoff from human activities that we do. There's a lot of pollution that goes into the sea. It could be pollution from agriculture. It could be pollution from the cities. The marine outfalls, and if we do agriculture on the coastal waters near shore, you can actually suck up a lot of the stuff and recycle it back. So that's a very distinct possibility that eutrophication of waters can be avoided by actually doing specific agriculture of the sea.
Yes.
Around the world, the majority of the coastal areas do not process their sewage before they dump it in the ocean. And a lot of that has to do with availability of technology that's affordable to put in those areas on small scale. So my point of view would be decentralize and address the pollution before it enters the watercourse. And that applies both to solid municipal waste as well as sewage. If you look even in Ireland, there are places where the water is not treated before it's dumped, whether it's industrial wastewater or human sewage. And that applies globally. You can go to island nations. A lot of the hotels will empty their sewage holding tanks at night into the ocean. So a lot of what's happening around the world is because there are no affordable small-scale solutions that can be applied at a localized level, or because the capacity of the existing systems has been exceeded. And so it applies to big cities. San Francisco is an example. They talked about the fact that with the rising sea level, their infrastructure going out to the ocean is going to be below sea level. And they need to they need to spend money to redo the infrastructure of the city. So when you start to look around the world at the number of cities that are facing that type of problem, then you see pollution coming not just from runoff, but actually from the urban environment and from the village environment, because even those that have infrastructure in place now are going to be challenged by the efficacy of that infrastructure going forward.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I am an environmental lover, and I was just wondering, sometimes like watching the TV and stuff, we see the politics party like changes and stuff like that, and I get really nervous about it. I was just wondering, have you guys ever encountered any like policies or politics intervening with your business and your intentions to like protect the environment?
Yes, a lot. I think policy in general is a key to creating a sustainable future for all of us. And I think we as industries and innovators have a key role to play in engaging with policymakers around the world to inform them about the opportunities and to discuss with them what is possible and what is desired in these societies going forward, and what kind of regulations would enable more of the right solutions and prevent the wrong solutions in societies. We engage a lot in these kind of activities around the world. We call it public affairs activities. And we have specifically worked with, for example, in China, some years back, enzymes was not a favorite technology in China because of the intellectual property rights was not on Chinese hands. We worked then with a number of organizations driving industries such as cleaning industry, laundry and cleaning industries, who was very close to the Chinese government. We worked with them to establish documentation of the benefits of our solutions for the Chinese nation. And we don't know exactly how these processes worked, but we certainly show a change of language in some of the parts of the Chinese 5-year plan, in favor of our technology. So we managed through dialogue and collaboration with key players at high level in China to drive a change in some of the policy frameworks. So, and in general, I see a fast-growing interest around the world from policymakers to engage with companies, to have these conversations when you approach them with a sustainability approach. And I think the UN Global Goals, this great framework we have for policies to drive sustainable development, is a fantastic opportunity for business to put yourself into a relevant context for policymakers, to have these conversations about what policies need to change to drive more of the wanted solutions going forward.
I'm going to add a different angle. I think as a company, you have to be ready to pivot if things don't start going in your direction. So we as a company, we had decentralized wind and waste, and now we only do waste. When I went to a breakfast meeting here with politicians, probably, I want to say 6 years ago now, there was a statement made by one of the members of parliament that basically that the full focus of the government was going to be on offshore wind. And I left that meeting, I went back to my company, and we shelved our onshore wind technology because we still needed to finish development, we still needed to do testing, and we needed all of the infrastructure to be around us to be able to do that. So I would say that in some instances you can influence, but you need to realize when, hands down, move aside, try something different if you're going to make a difference. So that's going to be my give up and go on.
Yes. So. I think we'll have time to only one final question.
So I think we're all aware that Cape Town is running out of water. It's one of the developed cities. So do you think this is just an isolated event, or is this the beginning of big developed cities running out of resources? What are your thoughts on this topic? Thank you.
A huge issue around the world, yeah. I mean, we all saw the water map, and then you're creating dense urban environments, and you're taking local water, if possible, to create an infrastructure, and there's very little reuse of water around the world. And there are cultures where it's not suitable or not acceptable to reuse water, so that emphasizes and impacts even more greatly on the issue. So there's a lot of lobbying that needs to happen on the suitability of reusable water at I went around the world, and we lose 30% of the water just in transit back and forth from one building to a processing plant and back again. So when you say Cape Town is running out of water, imagine how much they're losing, that if they were just not losing that, they would have available. So save the 30%, that's the first step, and then get people to reuse water and get technologies in place that use less water. So all of the textile industry and the other industries that are heavy in water use that are in those urban environments, you can also start to reduce that.
So I don't know how to say this, but I actually think it's good that they have these problems in Cape Town, because we need that pain for people to wake up. I mean, we can solve all these issues. We are managing water so stupidly all over the world. There's so much more we can do. There are so many more technologies that can be applied, so we can fix these problems. Unfortunately, we need these crisis situations and pain points for people to wake up and step forward and act. But that's how human nature is, unfortunately. But the good thing is we can solve it, and we will solve it. There's plenty of great technologies around that can help, and we represent some of them, and that's really great. And I think that was the final word. Thank you so much.